Hi, I'm Dave, founder of Halloween Year Round, and today we're talking about the new Guillermo Del Toro movie, Nightmare Alley. Now, this is a movie that I went into not really sure what to expect, not really sure what I was going to get. The previews reminded me a lot of Tim Burton, sort of like a Big Fish meets Dumbo theme with the whole carnival thing, albeit with Guillermo Del Toro's dark fantasy style, which, I've come to love and appreciate. And for the first half, that's largely how it feels. We're introduced to a drifter with a dark past, played by Bradley Cooper, and we see how he's welcomed into this very kind of unconventional carnival family. And this is where the movie really shines. One of the biggest strengths is its ensemble cast, which includes people like Toni Collette, who I love from Hereditary, Rooney Mara, who was great in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Willem Dafoe, who's great in anything. I saw this movie, and then I saw Spider-Man: No Way Home the next day, so I got like a double dose of Willem Dafoe, and it was awesome. It's also got David Strathairn, who I loved in Simon Birch, Dolores Claiborne, and The Bourne Ultimatum, and of course Kate Blanchett, who we'll get to a little bit later, as well as a few Del Toro regulars like Ron Perlman and Richard Jenkins. In fact, just on a total side note, seeing Ron Perlman as the strongest man alive is the most perfect casting I think I've ever seen. Del Toro himself emphasized that this was not a remake of that 1947 original, which I still haven't seen, but rather his reimagining, which kind of fits with that Burton theme in the same way he did Planet of the Apes and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He wasn't necessarily trying to emulate the original, he was just taking the novel and kind of adapting it in his own way. And you can really tell that it is based on a novel. Just with how the pacing plays out, it's very much divided into two sections. The first half and the second half, where the second half almost feels like a sequel to the first. The trailers mostly show off that whimsical carnival stuff that we get at the first half, because they can't really get into the stuff from the second half without spoiling, which I'm going to try and avoid here. I really don't want to give away too much about this movie, but I do have to get into just how tonally different both halves really are. So the first half is your carnival movie, and it almost feels like everything that American Horror Story Freak Show was trying to be, but actually better, with memorable characters, with just themes of outsiderness and inclusion, and what it means for people come from all walks of life to this carnival, people who were not accepted anywhere else, and they are accepted here. And it's interesting to see that it starts off at that really kind of positive, heartwarming, touching place, and then it gets really dark and twisted as the movie goes on. I really like how, so our main character, Stanley, played by Bradley Cooper, we're kind of very slowly introduced to him. Like the first 10-15 minutes, he doesn't say a whole lot. You're not sure if he's even going to be the main character. It almost feels like Willem Dafoe, has more lines than he does. It's interesting that at the beginning, he seems to be the only one that actually genuinely cares about other people. So he's the one who's horrified at how they treat the geek, basically, letting him sleep in a cage like an animal. He's even more horrified when Willem Dafoe just like casually tells him, oh yeah, you find an alcoholic and you get him addicted to drugs, and then you turn him into a geek. And he's just saying this like it's normal. Like, oh, why wouldn't you do that? Almost like he's proud of this messed up technique he has to exploit a human being. And Bradley Cooper, or Stanley, I'm just going to call him Bradley Cooper because that's how I am. He's horrified by it, which is, I think, all the more interesting because the second half of the movie gets so dark. When people call this a dark thriller, they're definitely referring to that second half, where you see how Bradley Cooper's character kind of goes on his own Breaking Bad-esque path down the dark side, so to speak. And it's interesting knowing that now, looking at that first half, it makes me question a lot more. It makes me look at it from a different point of view. A, was he genuinely a caring person, and it was the world and sort of competition and the hustle to survive culture that turned Bradley Cooper into a monster? Or was he always a monster just faking, empathy for other humans? And I think I don't know that that's necessarily the takeaway that the movie was going for, but it's what I got from it. It's that the second half is darker, but it makes that first half all the more interesting to go back and look at. He's probably one of my favorite Del Toro characters, just because there's a complexity to him where he's doing some pretty messed up stuff, especially when he teams up with the psychologist played by Cate Blanchett, where he's got his whole mysticism, psychic routine, and he knows he's taking advantage of people. He gleefully takes advantage of people for the money, and it's like he does it so much he almost believes it himself. He's like one of those televangelists who actually believes what they're peddling because they've told so many lies that they start to think it's true themselves. And there, at a certain point, it stops being about desperation and starts being about how far can I take this? How far can I go with this? And ultimately, again, without getting into spoilers, it has some pretty deadly results and deadly consequences for the people that he's manipulating and he's exploiting. It makes me think back to Harry Houdini, famous magician, was known for exposing fake psychics, exposing mystics, and he saw it as they were taking advantage of grieving people. And even though he was this magician, he always admitted, no, it's a trick. It's not real. I don't know. Magic isn't real. I've got the key hidden in here. I'm doing this. And it's just, Houdini would have been the guy to expose Bradley Cooper at the height of his, shall we say, immoral career. So I can't say too much more about the plot. Again, I really recommend you go see this. I also recommend you watch the original. I definitely want to check that out and maybe even do a comparison of both. But as far as, this being a Guillermo Del Toro movie, the set design, the art design, it's on point. It's amazing. I feel like between this, Shape of Water, and Crimson Peak, Del Toro has kind of really found his niche with these like early 20th century period pieces where everything's much more vibrant than you're used to seeing from that era. We're used to seeing kind of old black and white films, and we tend to think of that era as very kind of dark, very dry. And he finds the vibrant color in it, and I find that fascinating. And he takes sort of the norms of the day and kind of toys around with them and runs with them to very interesting fantasy-esque places. I mean, look at how, one could interpret The Shape of Water as sort of a commentary on interracial relationships, which were very much illegal at that time. You have a woman and basically the creature from the Black Lagoon. You have Crimson Peak kind of criticizing what was romance of that era. Oh, you barely know this man. Let's run off and marry him and move to his castle. I sure hope he's not planning on killing me with it. Well, actually, I do. If you haven't seen Crimson Peak, go see that one. That's like one of my favorites. And then you have Nightmare Alley, where you see how, Bradley Cooper can take, the carnival. There's a real dichotomy to it, where it's an accepting place for people who've been kicked out of other places, people who society would ostracize, people who would be discarded. But at the same time, there's some messed up things happening there. And, ultimately, is what Bradley Cooper's doing by manipulating people any worse than Willem Dafoe's basically turning a human being into an animal and making him bite off the head of a chicken? I think that, Del Toro is not necessarily... There's no clear good guy and bad guy, and that's kind of what I like. Bradley Cooper is our protagonist, but he is most certainly not a good guy. And even the other characters who call him out on it, they're not, no one is innocent in this, and it's an interesting exploration, I think, in really what is morally gray, and it takes that, the setting. It feels like that neo noir thriller that I'm sure the 1947 version is, where they all talk like this, like they're on the radio. But this takes that setting and kind of just infuses it with that dark fantasy, uh, you know, I guess vibe, even though it's not technically fantasy, but it's much more colorful than you would expect a movie set in that era to be. So, I'm just gonna say this. I'm gonna come out and say this. I love Tim Burton, but Tim Burton hasn't been the Tim Burton I love since Sweeney Todd. That's the last movie he did that I actually really, really loved. I feel like he's been in a bit of a rut where it's like he's got the style, he's got the visuals, but he doesn't have the substance. In a weird way, and I know I'm going to get flack for saying this, so go ahead and write your angry comments below, or if you agree with me, comment that you do. Guillermo Del Toro is the new Tim Burton of the 90s in his heyday. Guillermo Del Toro has become that filmmaker that has the interesting visuals, that has the creative style, that has the unusual dream-like horror-esque dark fantasy, not zeitgeist, but panache. But he's got the substance to go with it, at least for now. Del Toro is a guy that when he's doing giant fighting robots and he's trying to be cheesy, I struggle to connect with it. When he's trying to go dark, he goes dark. But there's like a beauty and a poetry to it. So if you're going into Nightmare Alley expecting a typical horror film, you're not going to get that at all. You're going to get two movies kind of stitched together. You're going to get a whimsical carnival movie at the beginning, and then you're going to get that very, very dark thriller where you're like, oh my God, what won't this guy do to get ahead? What won't this guy do to win? What despicable, immoral act will he not commit? Whether it's murder, whether it's stealing, it's just... I went into this movie expecting, not really knowing what to expect, and by the end of it, I was like, oh my God, did he just do that? And then, well, in his mind, he had to do it. And the fact that I almost found myself agreeing with him, like, well, if I were in that scenario, like, you've gone this far, the only way out of the situation is to do X, Y, and Z, even though you never would have thought about doing X, Y, and Z when you first woke up in the morning. So, I don't even remember what point I was trying to make. Oh, right. I'm not going to edit this out. So, if you go in expecting a typical horror movie, it is not that at all. If you go in expecting a neo-noir thriller with that kind of vibrantly colored gothic dark fantasy Guillermo del Toro twist that only Guillermo del Toro can deliver, I think you're going to like it. I think you're going to... I wish I could tell you how it compares to the original, but I do plan on watching that soon, and I will probably do a video with a buddy of mine comparing the two of them, so check back for that maybe sometime in January. I'm also going to be doing, in a few days, I'm going to be doing a couple Spider-Man videos for No Way Home, and I'm also going to be doing a full ranking of every Guillermo del Toro movie, including this one. So check back for that, as well as a very special Christmas horror-themed episode sometime this week before Christmas. So, as always, like, share, subscribe, all the YouTube stuff. If you don't, Bradley Cooper may just play a mental trick on you and make you think that you subscribed. As always, my name is Dave. Thanks for watching, and... every day is Halloween.